1959. A jungle path near the border of North and South Vietnam. Major Nguyen Van Hieu leads a column of 500 porters through dense vegetation. Each porter carries 55 pounds on their back. Rice, ammunition, medical supplies, weapons parts, everything wrapped in a waterproof material, everything carefully balanced. The path barely exists. More of a suggestion than a road. Roots twist across the ground. Vines hang from trees. Mud sucks at boots with every step. The porters move single file, maintaining distance, staying quiet, listening for aircraft. This is Group 559, the first organized effort to move supplies from North Vietnam to communist forces in the south. The route will eventually be called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Right now, it's just a footpath through the jungle. Nothing special. Nothing that would concern military planners. Major Hieu knows the journey will take months. They'll walk through Laos and Cambodia, avoiding main roads, avoiding villages when possible, staying hidden, moving only at night when they can, resting during the day under jungle canopy. The Americans don't know about this yet. When they find out, they'll laugh. A supply line through triple canopy jungle? Impossible to sustain. Too vulnerable to air power. Too primitive to matter. The jungle will stop them. Disease will stop them. Logistics will stop them. The Americans are wrong. Within 15 years, this primitive footpath will evolve into the most sophisticated supply network in modern warfare. It will move hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies. It will transport entire divisions of troops. It will sustain a war that the most powerful military on Earth cannot stop. The Ho Chi Minh Trail will become the artery of victory. And every attempt to cut that artery will fail. Not because the Americans lack firepower, not because they lack technology, but because they fundamentally misunderstand what they're fighting. This isn't a road. It's a living organism, constantly adapting, constantly evolving, impossible to kill because there's no single vital organ to strike. The Americans will drop more bombs on this jungle than fell on Germany in World War II. And the supplies will keep flowing. The troops will keep moving. The war will continue. The Ho Chi Minh Trail will prove that determination can overcome technology, that human will can defeat precision bombing, that a nation willing to sacrifice everything cannot be stopped by a nation unwilling to sacrifice enough. This is the story of how a footpath became a highway, how American commanders went from laughter to desperation, how the impossible became inevitable. In 1959, the political situation in Vietnam was deteriorating. The Geneva Accords of 1954 had divided the country. North Vietnam under communist control, South Vietnam under a nominally democratic government backed by the United States. Elections were supposed to reunify the country. Those elections never happened. The North Vietnamese leadership, led by Ho Chi Minh, decided reunification would require force. But there was a problem. The South was separated by the Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ, a strip of land along the 17th parallel, heavily monitored, difficult to cross. Moving supplies and troops directly across the DMZ was nearly impossible, too visible, too vulnerable. The Americans and South Vietnamese watched that border constantly. Anyone trying to cross in force would be detected and destroyed. The solution was the trail. Route supplies through Laos and Cambodia, neutral countries, countries the Americans claimed to respect the neutrality of. Move through jungle where aerial reconnaissance couldn't see you. Establish way stations, build support infrastructure, create a supply line that bypassed the DMZ entirely. Group 559 was established in May 1959, named after the month and year of its creation. Their mission was simple: get supplies from North Vietnam to communist forces in the South, by any means necessary. The initial trail was primitive, footpaths used by local tribes for centuries, mountain passes known only to locals, river crossings that appeared on no maps. The first groups moved slowly. 20 miles per day was good progress. In monsoon season, 5 miles might take an entire day. Porters carried everything on their backs. There were no vehicles, no trucks, no roads wide enough for trucks. Just men and women walking through jungle. Each porter carried 55 pounds. Some carried more. They'd walk for months, from North Vietnam through Laos into South Vietnam, then back north for another load. The casualty rate was staggering, not from combat, from the environment. Malaria killed porters, dysentery, snake bites, falls from mountain trails. Some groups lost 30% of their people just to disease and accidents. But the supplies got through, slower than desired, in smaller quantities than needed. But they got through. The Americans knew something was happening. Intelligence reports mentioned supply movements, but the scale seemed insignificant. A few tons of supplies moving through jungle? That couldn't sustain any serious military operation. The reports were noted and largely dismissed. American military doctrine didn't account for this kind of logistics. American supply chains required roads, trucks, ports, railways, massive infrastructure. The idea that an army could be supplied by porters walking through jungle was absurd, primitive, inefficient, not worth serious concern. They were catastrophically wrong. By 1960, Group 559 had established the basic route. The trail wasn't one path. It was a network, multiple routes from multiple starting points, converging on way stations where supplies were consolidated, then branching again toward multiple destinations in the South. If one route was discovered, supplies shifted to another route. The network was redundant by design. The North Vietnamese learned from every trip. They mapped water sources, identified caves for shelter, established hidden supply caches, built simple bridges that could be disassembled during the day and reassembled at night. Every group that completed the journey added knowledge. The trail became more efficient with each passing month. In 1961, the first bicycles appeared on the trail. Not for riding, for pushing. A modified bicycle could carry 400 pounds of supplies. One person could push it, slowly. But 400 pounds was 7 times what a porter could carry. The bikes had reinforced frames, wide handlebars for control. The rider would walk alongside, pushing and guiding the bike. The terrain was wrong for bicycles. Too steep, too muddy, too covered in roots and rocks. But necessity drove innovation. The Vietnamese developed techniques. Teams would help each other up slopes, lower bikes down steep descents with ropes, carry bikes across rivers and streams. What should have been impossible became routine. American observers who learned about the bicycles laughed. Bicycles? In that terrain? The intelligence was dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. No serious military supply line could rely on bicycles. It was confirmation of North Vietnamese desperation and primitive capability. Nothing to worry about. But the bicycles worked, and more kept coming. By late 1961, thousands of bicycles were moving south on the trail, each one carrying supplies that would have required 7 porters. The efficiency had increased 7-fold. The capacity of the trail had multiplied, and the Americans still weren't taking it seriously. The real transformation began in 1962. The North Vietnamese made a strategic decision: invest in the trail, not as a temporary expedient, as permanent infrastructure, the lifeline that would sustain the war until victory. Engineers were assigned to Group 559. Not a few, thousands. Their mission was to turn footpaths into roads, build bridges that could support trucks, create way stations with maintenance facilities, dig underground bunkers for fuel storage, construct the infrastructure for modern logistics while hiding it from American aerial reconnaissance. The work was staggering. Much of it happened at night. During the day, workers would hide in jungle or underground. At night, they'd emerge and work by moonlight or covered lamps. Roads were cut through jungle, crude at first, barely passable. But each week they got better. Each month they got wider. Trees were cut selectively, leave the canopy intact to hide the road from above, remove just enough to allow a truck to pass. The roads twisted and turned, following terrain, staying under cover. From the air, they were invisible. From the ground, they were functional. By late 1962, the first trucks reached the trail. Soviet-made trucks, Chinese trucks, anything the North Vietnamese could acquire. They were modified for the terrain, reinforced suspensions, low gears for climbing steep grades, extra fuel tanks for the long journey. Each truck could carry 3 tons of supplies, the equivalent of 55 porters or 7 bicycles. The trail's capacity exploded. What had taken months to move on foot now moved in weeks by truck. The quantity of supplies reaching the South increased exponentially. Weapons, ammunition, food, medicine, everything a growing insurgency needed. And the Americans were just starting to notice. American intelligence in 1963 finally grasped the scale of what was happening. The Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't a primitive supply line. It was becoming a highway. Photo reconnaissance showed signs of vehicle traffic. Not conclusive. The jungle canopy hid too much, but enough to raise alarms. The response was predictable. Bomb it. The trail ran through Laos and Cambodia. The Americans publicly respected Laotian and Cambodian neutrality. But covertly, they approved airstrikes. If the trail could be cut, the insurgency in the South would wither. Starved of supplies, forced to negotiate or surrender. Operation Barrel Roll began in December 1964. U.S. aircraft began bombing the trail in Laos. The targets were identified through various intelligence means: photo reconnaissance, signal intercepts, ground reconnaissance teams. The strikes were meant to be surgical, destroy bridges, crater roads, block mountain passes, make the trail unusable. It didn't work. The trail was too dispersed, too redundant. Bomb one bridge, the Vietnamese built 3 more. Crater one road, they built a bypass overnight. The trail had no single point of failure. It was a network. Damage one part, the supplies flowed through other parts. And the Vietnamese were learning. They began moving primarily at night. American aircraft were less effective at night. The Vietnamese would hear aircraft approaching, stop, turn off lights, wait motionless until the danger passed, then continue. The Americans were bombing empty roads and hitting nothing. The Vietnamese also developed rapid repair techniques. A bombing raid would crater a road. By morning, workers would have filled the craters and the road would be passable again. Bridges were built with multiple spans. Destroy one span, vehicles use the others. destroy the entire bridge. A replacement appeared within days. The Americans dropped thousands of tons of bombs on the trail in 1965. Intelligence estimated the trail's capacity was reduced by perhaps 10%. The Vietnamese simply absorbed the losses, increased the number of trucks, expanded the road network, built more redundancy. The trail wasn't being destroyed. It was getting stronger. By 1966, the trail had become sophisticated. It was no longer a single route. It was hundreds of miles of interconnected roads, way stations every 15 miles, fuel depots hidden underground, maintenance facilities camouflaged under jungle canopy, anti-aircraft positions defending key points. The Vietnamese moved approximately 5,000 tons of supplies per month down the trail, enough to sustain 100,000 fighters in the south. The insurgency was growing. American ground forces were arriving in increasing numbers. But they couldn't cut the supply line feeding their enemies. American commanders were no longer laughing. They were concerned. The trail had become a strategic problem. Every analysis showed that the war couldn't be won while the trail remained operational. The North Vietnamese could replace losses faster than the Americans could inflict them. As long as supplies flowed, the war would continue indefinitely. The bombing intensified. Operation Steel Tiger focused specifically on the trail. Hundreds of sorties per day. B-52s carpet-bombed suspected truck parks and way stations. Fighter bombers attacked individual vehicles. A C-130 gunships prowled at night with sensors and weapons designed for truck hunting. The Vietnamese adapted to everything. Trucks moved with lights off, drivers navigating by memory and moonlight. When sensors detected truck engines, the Vietnamese used recorded engine sounds to draw aircraft to false targets. They built mock truck parks that looked real from the air. American bombs destroyed dummy vehicles, while real trucks moved elsewhere. The trail became a cat-and-mouse game. The Americans developed better sensors. The Vietnamese developed better camouflage. The Americans used faster aircraft. The Vietnamese increased anti-aircraft defenses. The Americans dropped delayed fuse bombs that would explode hours after being dropped. The Vietnamese learned to detect them and avoid those areas. It was asymmetric warfare at its finest. The Americans had overwhelming technological superiority. But the Vietnamese had intimate knowledge of the terrain, infinite patience, and willingness to sacrifice for victory. The people who made the trail work were extraordinary. Truck drivers who navigated impossible roads in total darkness. Engineers who rebuilt bridges while under bombardment. Anti-aircraft crews who defended way stations knowing they were priority targets. Porters who still walked sections where trucks couldn't go. The youth volunteers were critical. Young people, often teenagers, who maintained the trail. They'd repair roads damaged by bombing, clear landslides, guide trucks through difficult sections, man the anti-aircraft guns, live in the jungle for months at a time with minimal supplies and constant danger. The casualty rate was horrific. American bombing killed thousands of trail workers. Disease killed thousands more. Accidents on dangerous roads killed thousands more. But for every person lost, another volunteered. The trail was seen as the key to national liberation. Serving on the trail was an honor despite the danger. Truck drivers were elite. It required enormous skill to drive those roads at night without lights, to navigate by memory, to coax overloaded vehicles up slopes that seemed impossible, to survive the journey when American aircraft hunted you constantly. Many drivers made dozens of trips, some made over 100. Each trip was a gamble with death. The Americans tried everything to stop the trail. They dropped millions of sensors along the roads. Acoustic sensors detected truck engines. Seismic sensors detected movement. The sensors would transmit to aircraft overhead. The aircraft would attack the location within minutes. The Vietnamese countered with deception. They'd play recordings of truck engines in empty areas. They'd herd cattle past sensors to trigger false alarms. They'd carry sensors away from roads and place them in useless locations. The Americans would bomb empty jungle while trucks moved unmolested. Chemical defoliation was attempted. Agent Orange and other herbicides were sprayed on jungle covering the trail. The goal was to remove the canopy, make the roads visible from the air, allow better targeting of bombing. It had limited effect. The jungle was too vast. The herbicides killed vegetation in targeted areas. But there were thousands of miles of trail. Spraying couldn't cover everything, and the Vietnamese simply built new roads through areas that hadn't been sprayed. The defoliation created ecological disaster, but didn't stop the supplies. Commando raids were tried. Special forces teams inserted into Laos to ambush convoys, to call in airstrikes on discovered positions. Some succeeded. Many teams were killed or captured. The Vietnamese defended the trail with regular army units, not guerrillas. Professional soldiers with orders to protect the supply line at all costs. The trail had its own dedicated anti-aircraft defense. Hundreds of guns, thousands of soldiers. The Vietnamese knew which sections were most vulnerable. They concentrated defenses there. American pilots learned that attacking the trail meant facing intense anti-aircraft fire. Many aircraft were shot down. Many pilots were killed or captured. By 1968, the trail reached peak efficiency. The Tet Offensive required massive supplies. The trail delivered. In the months before Tet, the Vietnamese moved over 10,000 tons per month down the trail. Enough ammunition for a nationwide offensive. Enough weapons to arm tens of thousands of fighters. Enough supplies to sustain combat for months. The Americans knew the buildup was happening. They could see the indicators, but they couldn't stop it. The bombing continued. The trail adapted. The supplies flowed. Tet proved the trail's strategic importance. The offensive failed militarily. The Viet Cong were devastated. But it succeeded psychologically. American public support for the war collapsed. And it was only possible because the trail had delivered the supplies to make it happen. After Tet, the Americans escalated trail interdiction efforts. Operation Commando Hunt used every available aircraft to attack the trail during the dry season when traffic was heaviest. From October 1968 to May 1969, American aircraft flew over 24,000 attack sorties against the trail, dropped over 450,000 tons of bombs. The Vietnamese estimated 2,000 trucks were destroyed. They'd sent 12,000 trucks down the trail during that period. The loss rate was 16%. Acceptable. The Vietnamese built more trucks than they lost, expanded the road network, increased redundancy. The trail survived, and it kept growing. By 1970, the trail included over 12,000 miles of roads. Not all were passable by truck. Many were still footpaths or bicycle routes. But thousands of miles could handle trucks. Some sections were good enough for tanks. Yes, tanks. The North Vietnamese began moving tanks down the trail in 1970. T-54 tanks. Disassembled, transported in pieces, reassembled at destinations in the south. The logistics were insane, but they did it because the trail made it possible. The trail had become more than a supply line. It was a symbol, proof that American power had limits, that determination and sacrifice could overcome technology, that the Vietnamese couldn't be defeated as long as the trail functioned. American commanders obsessed over the trail. Entire air campaigns were designed around interdicting it. Billions of dollars worth of aircraft and munitions were expended attacking it. Some of the most sophisticated weapons in the American arsenal were designed specifically for trail interdiction. And none of it was enough. The trail survived. The supplies flowed. The war continued. The human cost of the trail is difficult to calculate. Tens of thousands died maintaining it. Perhaps over 100,000 when you count porters, drivers, engineers, defenders, and support personnel. Disease, bombs, accidents, and combat killed them. But their sacrifice sustained the war effort. Many who walked the trail as young soldiers later said it was the defining experience of their lives. Months in the jungle, constant danger, minimal food, disease, exhaustion, but also purpose, camaraderie, the knowledge that they were part of something larger, that their sacrifice mattered. American pilots who flew missions against the trail developed grudging respect for their enemy. They knew the trail workers were brave, that maintaining that supply line under constant bombardment required incredible courage, that the Vietnamese were worthy adversaries, even if they were enemies. The trail functioned until the end of the war. In 1972, during the Easter Offensive, the trail delivered supplies for the largest North Vietnamese conventional offensive of the war. Tanks, artillery, ammunition for months of combat. The trail made it possible. In 1975, the final offensive that conquered South Vietnam was sustained by the trail. Divisions moved south on the roads that had taken 15 years to build. Supplies that had been stockpiled reached the front. The trail delivered victory. After the war, the Vietnamese kept parts of the trail as monuments. Sections of road, old way stations, anti-aircraft positions, museums commemorating the workers who made it function. The trail had become legend. The artery that fed victory. The statistics tell the story. From 1959 to 1975, the trail moved approximately 1 million tons of supplies. It transported hundreds of thousands of troops. It sustained a war that killed 58,000 Americans, over 1 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, and countless civilians. The Americans dropped over 2.5 million tons of bombs on the trail, more than fell on Germany in World War II, flew hundreds of thousands of sorties, lost hundreds of aircraft, spent billions of dollars, all trying to cut a supply line that couldn't be cut. Because the trail wasn't a road. It was an idea. The idea that a determined people couldn't be stopped by bombs. That national liberation was worth any sacrifice. That patience and persistence would eventually overcome technological superiority. The Americans never understood this. They kept thinking one more bombing campaign would work. One more technology would make the difference. One more strategy would finally cut the trail. They measured success in trucks destroyed and roads cratered. But those metrics were meaningless. The only metric that mattered was whether supplies reached the South. And they always did. Maybe slower than desired, maybe in smaller quantities than hoped. But they got through. Always. Every month, every year, for 16 years. The trail proved that the Vietnam War was unwinnable on American terms. The U.S. couldn't win without invading North Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia to physically cut the trail. But that would risk Chinese intervention and expand the war beyond acceptable limits. So the trail remained operational. And as long as it functioned, the North could sustain the war indefinitely. The Americans could win every battle, kill more enemy, control more territory. None of it mattered if they couldn't stop the supplies. The trail made conventional American military victory impossible. It changed the war from "how do we win" to "how long can we sustain this stalemate?" And America, a democracy with a population increasingly opposed to the war, couldn't sustain it as long as North Vietnam could. The trail was the physical manifestation of that reality. A road the Americans couldn't close, an artery they couldn't cut, a problem they couldn't solve. When Saigon fell in April 1975, North Vietnamese tanks rolled down highways that had once been the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The supply line had become an invasion route. The artery of victory had delivered the final triumph. American commanders who had laughed at the trail in 1959 were retired or dead by 1975. But if they'd lived to see the end, they would have understood their mistake. The trail wasn't funny. It was brilliant. A strategic masterstroke that neutralized American military superiority and made North Vietnamese victory inevitable. The trail required sacrifice beyond what Americans would accept. Tens of thousands dead just maintaining a supply line. Americans would never tolerate such casualties for such a mission. But the Vietnamese did, because they saw it as survival, as national liberation, as worth any price. That difference in willingness to sacrifice was the real lesson of the trail. Technology, firepower, and wealth matter in war. But commitment matters more. The side willing to endure more, sacrifice more, suffer more will usually prevail, even against a stronger opponent. The Ho Chi Minh Trail proved it. A footpath became a highway. Primitive logistics became sophisticated supply network. And the nation that controlled that artery won the war. Not because they were stronger, because they were willing to pay any price for victory. American commanders learned too late that you can't bomb away that kind of determination. That lesson cost 58,000 American lives and billions of dollars. It cost far more Vietnamese lives. But the trail survived. And the lesson remains. Never laugh at the enemy's logistics. Never dismiss their capability because it looks primitive. Never underestimate the power of human will backed by sacrifice. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was all those mistakes in one strategic miscalculation. And it became the artery that bled America dry in Vietnam. The supply line that couldn't be cut. The road that led to victory. The supplies that moved down the Ho Chi Minh Trail armed an enemy that mastered jungle warfare with one particular weapon. The AK-47 became legendary on that battlefield, and American soldiers initially dismissed it as crude and primitive. But when they saw it fired after being submerged in rice paddies and covered in mud, their laughter stopped. If you want to know why that rifle became the most feared weapon in the jungle, check out American soldiers laughed at the AK-47 until it kept firing in the jungle rain. And subscribe for more untold stories from the Vietnam War.